In 1996, the original Resident Evil released to the world as a seminal entry into the survival horror genre. Since players first fought for their life in an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of Raccoon City, the Resident Evil franchise has spawned 24 games, 4 animated films, and a series of 6 live-action films that have grossed over $1 billion at the box office. Resident Evil's influence is pervasive in the film and video game industries, so it makes sense that the property that influenced Resident Evil itself comes from both. While Resident Evil may have helped revive the zombie film genre and revolutionize the survival horror video game genre, it owes its creation to a relatively obscure film and video game that never saw a release in North America. A small team, a creepy mansion, and plenty of monsters. Sound familiar? The story of Sweet Home begins in 1980s Japan with up-and-coming film director Kiyoshi Kurosawa. No relation to Akira Kurosawa, of course. Kurosawa had written a script for a haunted house flick inspired by the popular American horror films of the time, particularly the Spielberg-produced Poltergeist. To get the film produced, Kurosawa turned to an actor he had worked with on a previous film, Juzo Itami. In addition to the occasional acting role, Itami was one of Japan's most respected and well-known directors of the 80s and 90s, his film Tampopo receiving a great deal of acclaim internationally. With Itami's weight behind the horror flick, Sweet Home landed distribution with Toho, the production company behind Godzilla. In line with Kurosawa's American influences for Sweet Home, special effects makeup maestro Dick Smith was brought in to create the ghouls that would haunt Sweet Home's characters. The film follows a small documentary crew who travel to the old, abandoned mansion of a famous artist who left priceless works of art in the home. However, the team finds more than they bargained for when they discover the mansion is haunted by a vengeful ghost who kills any trespassers. Sweet Home was released in 1989 to generally lukewarm reaction and failed to reach the success that Itami had hoped for. At the time of the film's production, there were already behind-the-scenes grumblings of friction between Kurosawa and Itami. From the start, Itami had insisted on a starring role for his wife Nobuko Miyamoto, and his preference for the film to feature some light-hearted comedic elements sat at odds with Kurosawa's vision of tragic horror. Before Sweet Home's home media and television release, Itami reshot some scenes and worked through a major re-edit of the film without Kurosawa's knowledge. The ensuing cut of the film is the only surviving version and led to a prolonged legal dispute between Kurosawa and Itami, with Kurosawa asking for his name to be removed from Itami's version of the film. His name was never removed, but this dispute is a likely reason the film was never released outside of Japan. On the same day as the film's release in 1989, a Sweet Home video game was released for the Nintendo Entertainment System in Japan. The game was developed at Capcom alongside the production of the film with supervision from Itami and Kurosawa. The game was directed by Tokuro Fujiwara, a legend of the early video game industry with credits such as Ghosts and Goblins, Mega Man, and Bionic Commando. Fujiwara was given a great deal of freedom with the development of the game, with Kurosawa going so far as to encourage Fujiwara to not feel obligated to precisely follow the film's story. What resulted was a game that many critics considered a far superior product to the film. Fujiwara was able to adapt the film's story into a deep RPG system with Metroidvania-like exploration through the movie's creepy haunted mansion setting. The game's 2D sprites and text menu-based combat may seem simplistic by today's standards, but the essential ideas within the game are anything but simple. The game's use of tonics as the only source of healing are easily recognizable as a direct inspiration for Resident Evil's healing herb system, and the fluid and cohesive structure of the mansion is one of the first successful attempts of a game world that is connected from beginning to end. And speaking of Resident Evil, Sweet Home goes beyond being simply an inspiration for the long-running series. Fujiwara is listed as a producer on the original Resident Evil, so it makes sense that the game started its life in 1993 as a remake of Sweet Home. Fujiwara chose protege Shinji Mikami to direct the game, and the pair worked to create a new universe as Capcom no longer held the rights to Sweet Home. Thus, the world of Resident Evil was born. The setting moved to America, and the documentary team becomes a police unit, but at its core, Resident Evil didn't diverge too far from the material which inspired its creation. Utilizing the far more powerful PlayStation allowed Mikami and Fujiwara to add a layer of polish to the successful formula that Fujiwara had created back in 1989. It's a popular internet activity to take a well-known property and use a little bit of mental gymnastics to link it to something much less popular. In the case of Resident Evil, its ties to an obscure and middling Japanese horror film don't really require a liberal use of the transitive property. It would have been perfectly acceptable for Resident Evil to have taken only the gameplay elements from Sweet Home, but by retaining the essential elements of Kiyoshi Kurosawa's original story, the Resident Evil series remains a link to the past of not only the video game industry, but of Japanese horror cinema, which remains a powerhouse of the genre. You've likely never seen or played Sweet Home, but moviegoers and gamers everywhere have unknowingly felt its influence in the 30 years since release. Neither the game nor the movie made much of a worldwide cultural impact in 1989, but Sweet Home's indirect influence on pop culture is undeniable. Thanks for watching this episode of BOOstalgia. If you want to hear more about Sweet Home, the video game, and the movie, Wesley and I talked a little bit more about it in our podcast, which you can find in the description below if you're interested. This is the end of our little BOOstalgia run. This was just a nice little experiment. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we hope to try some more interesting stuff with our content in the future. So if you want to stay up to date, please subscribe to the channel and follow us on our social media on Instagram and Twitter. Other than that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.